Any Bible questions? All right. If not, who does?
Okay. Can you tell me, as a Christian, when it comes time for when your loved ones have a funeral, is there anything wrong with what's the problem with cremation?
Oh, cremation? Well, think about it this way. We learn in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 that the soul goes back to God and the body goes back to dust, right? Well, cremation is just getting it back to dust a little bit faster. And so I don't see anything wrong with that. If you think about it, if there's the reason why people have such a problem with cremation is because they're expecting a future bodily resurrection. And so, especially from our perspective, we know that we go directly to heaven when we die, and this old body is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to go back to the dust. And so, there's nothing wrong with cremation within and of itself. So,
I think that's really interesting. We studied this on a number of occasions. Why people think like that is because, as you said, they're expecting a physical resurrection of the body, as if the body could enter heaven or could be eternally judged or anything of that nature. People still have that hang up, and that's come from not studying scriptures, putting emphasis on one or the other. And basically, they've been fooled over the years, I think, through the commercials and through what they call the people that do the bodies. They make more money. They make more money out of a lavish funeral. Funeral with a coffin, and you got to pay for the coffin. You got to pay for the embalming. You got to pay for the plot. You got to pay pretty much for everything. So it's more of a money thing than anything. That's what they push it so.
Right.
And I remember years ago, people were thinking, "Oh no," they would tell us, "But don't cremate me. Make sure that you bury me. I want to be buried."
Right.
Don't cremate me as if by cremating them that you're eternally damning them or something. They can't be resurrected or they can't be judged or they can't go to heaven.
Right. Now, let's pretend that there was a future body of the resurrection. Even if you were cremated, God could put that body back together, regardless. And think about it this way too. We know from Hebrews chapter 11 that there were people under the Old Testament who gave their body to be burned. That is, they were put to death by the people that didn't like them. They gave their body to be burned. One of those people, tradition tells us, is Isaiah, but we don't have any extensive record of that. We just know that there were people under the Old Testament who were followers of God who were burned to death for their faith in Him. That wouldn't eliminate their hope, right? So they have just as much hope as someone whose body wasn't burned and was preserved. So,
but the stigma of it is, I think it comes a little bit more forward than that, with the Salem witch hunts and all that.
Right.
Remember, anybody that caught being a witch or something that was burned at the stake.
Right.
Okay. And there was a lot of that going on. People were being accused of being witches and so forth, and burning it. So I think people kind of equivocate that with burning the body or something is like damning the body or something.
Sure. Yeah. That's an idea too, right? Ashley.
I know Brother Garrett has mentioned before, what about people that are dying in plane crashes or what have you?
Right. Yeah.
Pretty much same principle.
Well, I live back in Piedmont. There's a cemetery on the hill, and they won't bury the people that live in the apartments across the hill. They won't bury the people that live in the apartments on the other side of the road from the hill, because they only bury people that are dead, not people that are living. Yeah, right. Well, they say if an airplane crashes on the Georgia-Florida state line, where do they bury the survivors?
Don't really matter.
Right, because you don't bury survivors, right? All right, John 19, let's go to verse 31. Good question, though. That is something that a lot of people have concerns about. John 19, verse 31. And let me throw out one more thing in that. It's appointed unto man once to die, and after this judgment. Hebrews chapter 9, 27. Whatever state one man dies in, that's how he's going to be forever. Nothing after death that you do to that body is going to do anything about that man's salvation. You can't, if you burn the body, it's not going to affect the man. If it was wrong, that would be on the person who burns it, not the man himself. I guess unless he asked to do it. But still, his fate is sealed at death. And if you're baptized for that man who's dead, that's not going to do him any good either. Death is the end for an individual. At that point, it's either life and eternity with Christ or death, as the Scripture says, the second death, Revelation chapter 20. Okay, John 19:31. Now, I've been telling you that Jesus was baptized, not baptized. In a way, he was baptized in his sufferings, but he was put to death on Thursday and not on Friday. Now, this is one of those verses that we have questions about then. It seems to contradict that. Let's read this verse 31. Then the Jews, because it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Now, before we get into this passage, I just want you to remember that back in John 18 and verse 28, that those chief priests and people did not enter into the praetorium so that they might not be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover. They wouldn't eat the Passover till twilight that later on that evening. The Passover lamb would be slain at 3 o'clock. And so there's a plain passage, and we should allow that plain passage to help us interpret this passage here. But let me remind you about the Jewish feast days. We have Sabbath, and when we see that word Sabbath, our automatic thought goes to Saturday. But all of the Jewish feast days were Sabbaths. That was a day of rest. And so you have Passover is on the 14th, and then on the 15th of the month, what feast starts?
They have the after the Passover comes the week of unleavened bread.
That's it, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now go back to Leviticus chapter 23. If this was Friday, the 15th, we have a problem. Because in Leviticus chapter 23, the Bible says that they're not to do any work on the first day of those 7 days. Look at Leviticus 23 and verse 4 and following. He says, "These are the appointed times of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. Then on the 15th day of the same month, there is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work. But for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work." So on the first day of that feast and on the last day of that feast, they're not to do any type of work like that. Now here they are, going all around Jerusalem trying to get Jesus put on the cross and such. And so the Sabbath that's under consideration here in John 19:31 isn't the weekly Sabbath that's on Saturday, but this is a high day Sabbath. That is a feast day Sabbath. This is the Feast of Unleavened Bread that was to be treated like Sabbath day, where they're to have a day of rest for this feast. And so if we keep in mind what was said about the chief priests in John 18, where they hadn't yet partaken of the Passover, and we keep that in line with this verse in verse 31 of chapter 19, it stands to reason the Sabbath is the Feast of Unleavened Bread that's on Friday, and not the feast of, and not just the weekly Sabbath that they had every week. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So what are you saying that Jesus wasn't crucified on the Sabbath? Are you saying that it was just a regular Sabbath that he was crucified?
I'm saying Jesus was crucified on Passover, which wasn't...
Passover.
Right. So this Passover, it doesn't say that it was a day of rest. They had to do things like get the Passover lamb and get all that ready. Right. Right, it's preparation for that Feast of Unleavened Bread, preparation for that Passover, and such like that. So Jesus was crucified on Passover. Now, you have to remember, Thursday evening is when the disciples get together to have the Last Supper. Thursday morning, the following day, is when Peter denies Jesus, and when Jesus is taken into captivity and is going to be tried and all this. Okay, so Jesus is tried through the night on Thursday on into the Thursday morning, because their days are flip-flopped from how we operate. Now, Jesus says it is finished on the Thursday daylight portion of the day at 3 p.m. is when Jesus gives up the ghost. All right, so you have Jesus dying at 3 p.m. on Thursday. Now he's in Hades. There's day one. Nighttime is Friday. There's night one. Then the next day is Friday. There's day two. Then nighttime is Sabbath day, Saturday. There's night two. Then the next day is Saturday, day 3, and then Sunday evening starts at 6 p.m. on our Saturday. On Lonnie.
Yeah, this is that. This was the Passover week, and they ate the Passover lamb Jesus sent them to prepare. So they ate it that night, that Thursday night when they ate the lamb. After that, he taught them a lesson on humility. He washed their feet and everything. And then before the Passover, he had called Judas out and told him to go do what he had to do. So he went and got the silver from these people, and he was supposed to point Jesus out. And when they left the feast that Thursday night, they went into the garden, and that's where this thing took place with Jesus, telling his disciples to watch for him. And so that's when he came back, and Judas and them met him. That was still Thursday night. And so then when they had him all that night, and then the next morning, which would have been Friday, that's when they took him to Pilate, which was the third hour of the day, which would have been 9 o'clock. And they crucified him at that time. And so the 6th hour, he was on the cross. And then the 3rd hour, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, darkness, all that time. For 3 hours it was dark. So some people said that was for the first time that it was part of the day, but it was night. Then after he was crucified, and after he was crucified, they sent Pilate to take him off the cross, which would have been Friday at 9 o'clock before dark. So he was crucified, and they buried him that day before evening at 6. He was buried and in the grave. And so that's why some people said he was in the grave those 3 days, but later on they said 3 nights. I don't know whether they said 3 hours that was dark was a night or what. But that Passover was always eaten on Thursday. On Thursday. That's when they ate the Passover, and that's when they left on a Friday, because they left Egypt on a Friday, because the next day was the Sabbath.
All right, let's see. Okay, that's a lot to do.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so why would you say then that Okay, let's start here. I'm trying to think about where to start on this discussion. So Lonnie basically points out the regular understanding of Jesus' crucifixion and the days laid out there. Here's one of the problems that I have is that whenever they ate that Passover meal, allegedly on the night before, whenever they ate that Last Supper, okay, what were they doing? They were reclining at the table, right?
Right.
But how were they supposed to eat the Passover meal?
Ready to go.
Right. Ready up, all standing up, they got their stuff on, they're ready to go. And so Jesus and his disciples are reclining. Now, if you look at John 13, notice what he says in verse 1. Now, before the Passover, Jesus, knowing that the hour had come, he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end. During supper, the devil having already been put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, etc., etc. So this is a meal that they had before the Feast of Passover.
Okay. Number one, during this Passover meal, remember they said that they asked him a question, and John asked him who it was, and he said he leaned on Christ's breast. So they were still reclining after that meal.
Right, but they were supposed to be standing up, completely dressed.
They're supposed to be prepared to leave. And it says standing up, be ready to leave, during that time.
Be prepared to leave from what?
Egypt.
Well, I'm getting confused. Are we talking about when Christ was the night he took the Passover meal?
Right, but they did.
I
They did.
understand what the initial what the Passover meal was when they were about to depart Egypt.
Right.
And they would have been ready. This was a command to be up, ready, dressed, and ready to depart at any time.
Right.
But this was a continuation of the Passover meal, wasn't it?
Right, but they did it in remembrance of that.
Right. So, but they would not have. But there wasn't a command for them to be prepared to leave the land. Then they would have been up, dressed, ready to go with the sandals on and all that, ready to leave the land, because that was not a command there. The Passover was to be a continuous remembrance of their departure from Egypt. It wasn't the actual exodus of Egypt. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
They were carrying on this tradition because this was in the law that they were supposed to keep it, but they were the circumstances was quite different. As I understand, they wasn't supposed to eat the Passover ready to leave like the children of Israel was when they was in Egypt.
All right, hang on. I'm trying to find it. See, I should have went ahead and got all these notes ready, but I didn't think we're going to get into. Let's see. It's my understanding that they did go through that same procedure every time to play it out, to remember how it was under the Old Testament. But let me try to find this reference. I know I've got it here in these notes.
It's supposed to be a reminder of them of when they left Egypt.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's all it was. And every time the children would ask this question, then they would tell them why they celebrate.
But that had more to do with why they were eating what they were eating.
Right.
And so forth.
Well, when we read about the Last Supper of Jesus, they didn't even eat lamb or anything like that. The lamb wouldn't have been killed.
They said, Jesus sent his two disciples to go prepare, tell the man that he sent them and to get the room ready for that supper ahead of time. And they went and did that. And so when they came, it was ready and they was eating it.
All right, but where do you see that, though, that they got the lamb? They got the unleavened bread. They had the leaven all cleared out of the house, and they had the unleavened bread, and they had the fruit of the vine.
He said he was still a man that would have the picture, let him know about, that he had sent them to prepare the place for the Passover and we're going to be eating there. And that was that Thursday that they was preparing it.
By tradition, it would have been the meal, type meal. But to carry on with the Passover, you would have to eat the same thing and with the same mindset. And I think that's what was being passed on. The tradition, the Sabbath, tradition of it, a constant reminder of when God delivered them from Egypt and what God commanded them to eat and be prepared to do. But to say that they were dressed with the full robes and everything, shoes on, ready to go to depart the land, that's not the reminder. That's an actual thing. And I don't know if I look at it from that standpoint like that. But it's a mild point.
Right. I think that all right, so let's go back to John 13 for a moment, and let's look at one more passage here. In John 13 and verse 29, this is after the supper. Here's what Scripture says. Jesus had sent Judas out, said, "What you do quickly." It says, "For some were supposing, because Jesus had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, 'Buy the things we have need for the feast,' or else he should have given something to the poor." So even after the supper, after Jesus has sent Judas out, they're still looking for preparations for this feast. So the chief priests hadn't even partaken of the supper yet, or the Passover meal yet, in John 19. The apostles hadn't partaken of the feast yet. They were still looking to make preparations for it. And in John 19 and verse 1, we see that this supper that they ate was before the feast of the Passover. And so, to me, it's hard to say that they ate the Passover that night, that they gathered before Jesus' death, whenever we have all these things that are laid out for us like this, you see. So whether or not they were supposed to dress up or what have you, 2,000 years or so, or 1,500 years or so after the Egypt account, kind of is an interesting idea. I always assumed that they did to play out that entire event, but maybe I'm taking that too far. Nevertheless, we do have these comments that indicate that they hadn't yet partaken of the feast.
Well, let me ask you a question. If that
all
was
right.
so, why didn't they put the blood on the lintels?
That's a good
You don't
idea.
play it out,
Right.
You have to play the whole thing out.
Right.
And it would have been the lamb that they selected. And it was in the Exodus, they had to go get a lamb, spotless and everything.
Right.
Slay that lamb, take that blood of that lamb, and strike the lintels of the house.
Right.
And then they would take the lamb itself and cook it, cook it, roast it, and then eat of it with bitter herbs,
Right.
unleavened bread.
Right.
Right? So, if we got a lamb involved in there, it should have been that the lamb was slain, the blood was taken and put on the little, struck the little thighs.
Right. Well, we don't have any account of them having a lamb on that night that they ate that.
Well, that's
So, look at 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 7 for a moment too. And I think this will give us some more insight into this whole thing. 1 Corinthians 5 verses 7 and 8.
But we can say, Daniel, by inference or by example,
Right.
that they would have to replay the Passover. They would have had to have a lamb. And you think about all in Jerusalem at this time, they were filled with sacrifices daily. The daily sacrifice was going on, and they were using lambs, pigeons, doves, things that
Right,
were
well-
authorized by the law.
Right.
This would have fell under the law, wouldn't it? You couldn't have substituted something else for a lamb, could you?
No, well, you could substitute.
Give and take what the Passover really stood for.
Right. Well, you could substitute turtle doves, if I'm not mistaken, if you couldn't afford the lamb.
I would
But,
offering.
right. Well,
Offering. During the Passover week, they were supposed to accumulate this to have it at the meal, a lamb, but unblemished. That's the same thing about him. He had to be unblemished.
right. So, 1 Corinthians 5, 7 and 8 says this: "Clean out the old leaven, so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Christ our Passover also has been sacrificed. Therefore let us celebrate the feast, not with the old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." Now here in 1 Corinthians 5, 7 and 8, it calls Jesus the Passover lamb. Now, notice what he says though before that. We clean out the old leaven, and then we have this Passover lamb. That's why Jesus called them together the night before his crucifixion, was to get that house ready so that they could partake of the Passover. But the Passover lamb and the Passover, as we see in John 18 and 19, they hadn't even, the chief priests and even Jesus' disciples in John 13 hadn't yet partaken of the feast. It wasn't to be partaken of until twilight on the 14th. And that would be the day that Jesus was crucified, because you have to have 3 days and 3 nights. Let me get the board again and draw it out once more. Ashley, you got a question?
So essentially, was that kind of like basically the point where, well, we know Jesus' death was to, bring about the kingdom and dissolve the law. But I guess what I'm saying is symbolically, I guess at that point his death was, it kind of felt like it did to where his death and him being the Passover was taking place what they basically would have been doing at that time.
As I mentioned before, the fact that Jesus dies at 3 p.m.
Right.
is an intentional thing,
Right.
because that was when traditionally the chief priests would be making this offering of the Passover lamb. But let me draw this out for you. And here's probably the most significant point out of all this. We can get all the details about everything, but this is the most convincing point for me. And that is how we count these days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Now the Jews, the way they count days is you have evening, and then you have morning. Now you have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Okay. R's Thursday. When you take little college classes, they make an R. So it's like Thursday. So that's how I always took it. Okay, what we need is 3 days and 3 nights. No matter where you start on, you know what? I know Sunday's the first day of the week, but let me tack it on right there to make it easier. All right. Let's say that wherever you want to start here, we'll say Jesus is raised at night, in the night time on Sunday before 6 a.m. So there's you have what? Right. So you have 1, 2, 3. Okay, and that means you have 1, 2, 3 Thursday during the day. But let's say it's on Sunday right here. Okay.
Years.
That's all right. So let's say it's right here. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And then let's see. That's Sunday during the daytime. Where am I at? I'm so confused. Okay. 1, 2, 3. But Jesus was crucified. Okay. Oh, I'm trying to think. Talking about the Hebrews, how they do the days, get your mind all messed up. Okay, so Jesus is crucified at 3 p.m.
Right.
Okay. During the daylight portion of the day. And when is he resurrected? He's resurrected before. Okay. He's resurrected on Sunday morning before sunrise. Okay. Now, if Jesus was resurrected after Sunday morning, then this whole thing right here would work.
Okay.
Because you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But since Jesus was resurrected before Sunday morning, since you have to start in the nighttime portion of the day right here, 1, 2, 3, and then you have to go to the morning, 1, 2, 3. It lines up with Thursday and not Friday.
The idea that I said when I was talking is that I don't know how they do it. They counted Friday when he was on the cross and it was dark, 3 hours. Was they counting that as a night or what? I don't know. But I do know that in Harmony with the Bible, it was that Thursday night when Christ was betrayed, and then that Friday morning.
Okay.
He was took to the Pilate. And then later on, during the third hour, Christ was dead, and they wanted, I'm saying, it was between the 12 and 3, that they wanted his body off the cross. And that's when Joseph went and got it that Friday during the daytime, and he was buried about around 3 o'clock. Okay. They called that a day. I said, I don't know day, and it was just 3 hours. I don't know that you count that 3 hours when it was dark or not, and then 3 hours when he was in the grave Friday night as a day. I don't know how they did it, but that's what happened, and that's the way the Passover was celebrated on a Thursday night.
So you have Thursday night.
Right.
Jesus is but they go evening to morning. And so if Jesus was betrayed on a Thursday night, that's the same thing as saying as Jesus was crucified on Thursday morning.
No, I'm saying not. Jesus was, they caught Jesus, he was betrayed that night. I don't know whether or not it was around what time or what. Was it at midnight or what time it was that night to get in the next day. But we know that during the night, he was with these Sanhedrin court. And the next day, early that morning, they had appealed to Pilate about Christ. They wanted him crucified, and this when all this took place. And then he was commanded to be crucified, and then the 3rd hour, he was on the cross. Up all the way up to the 6th hour. And then that's when everything was darkened for 3 hours. That's what I'm saying. 3 hours, it was dark during that time. And later on, that's when the soldiers came to break the leg of the prisoner, all of them, but they didn't break his leg. And so he was taken down off of that cross about 3 o'clock that afternoon. The 3rd hour when he was put on there, the 6th hour was 12 o'clock, and that's when it got dark from 12 to 3. And then later on, his body was taken off the cross and put in the grave, which would have been going on. It would have been before dark at 6. He was already buried, and that's what I'm saying. I don't know whether they count 3 o'clock during the time it was dark or what, and then the 3 hours that he was in the grave before midnight. I don't know how they're doing how all this figuring, but that's the way it's supposed to have been.
All right, so the way that they reckon time is sunrise to sunrise to sunset. So 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Right.
Okay, and this one's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Right.
Now, if the sun goes down in the middle of the day, in between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m.,
No.
they don't count that as a night. That's just That's just a miracle that's taking place.
That's all I'm saying is that I'm thinking that they might be counting it as a day, because that's the only way it could have happened. And then he was in the grave that night,
So
would have been Friday night.
if Jesus gives up the ghost at 3 p.m. on the day following Passover, on the day following the Last Supper, I should
It
say.
was before 3 on the Satan. And they buried him. All this was taking place during the time they was going to bury him. All this took place before 3 that afternoon, which would have been the 9th hour. He was in the grave.
Hang on, I got to go look up 3rd hour. Just a moment.
Yeah, the 3rd hour is 9 o'clock. The 3rd hour.
Right.
9 o'clock.
Okay. All right, hang on. 7? Okay. 7, 8, 9.
Yeah,
10,
it's
11, 12.
o'clock.
1, 2, 3. Okay. So 3 p.m. If we look at Matthew 27 and verse 46, you have darkness on the face of the earth from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m.
Right.
At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now that is Matthew 26:46. So Jesus is still alive. This is
what they were saying. At that time, he cried out, but I think it was before then, because they had to went through all these procedures to get him off the cross, and he was buried before 6 that afternoon.
Okay, let's take a look.
The timing, we don't know how it happened, but I'm just saying, this is what took place during all that time.
All right, let's go back to John 19 and read about this account, because we could talk about this all day. I'm just showing you my understanding, and I might get all my notes together and we can go through all the passages and look at all the objections. But let's look at John 19 and verse 32. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the others who were crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who had seen this has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows he's telling the truth so that you may believe. For these things come to pass to fulfill the Scriptures. Not a bone of him shall be broken. And another Scripture says, they shall look on him whom they pierced. Now, here we have a account of, this is after Jesus' death. And the way that an individual could prolong their life if they were being crucified was to push up, with their legs, because crucifixion is a death by asphyxiation. You hang there, and you can't draw in enough oxygen to maintain your life, and that's why they're breaking these legs. Jesus, of course, his legs were not broken in order to fulfill this scripture from Psalm 34:20, and also, by the way, the Passover lamb, its bones would not be broken. Exodus chapter 12 and verse 46. So that was another one of the things about the Passover lamb, is its legs were not to be broken. Or none of its bones were to be broken. And so Jesus fulfilled that type and shadow of the law in that way. Another one, verse 37, and Lonnie pointed out an excellent point about this last week. It says, they shall look on him whom they pierced. Only one soldier reached up with a spear. But the they there is Israel. They're the ones that use these lawless men to put Jesus on the cross. Okay, let's look at verses 38 and following. All right. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he may take the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus. What? What does yours say? What in the world? Well, all right, everybody that has 100 get on this side. Where anybody that has 75 will fight. A lot of pounds. How about that? Okay, more than two.
It says
About, yeah, okay. I guess that. All right. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. So here we have something interesting. The very people that take Jesus down and prepare his body are not his right-hand disciples, but it's these two guys that like Jesus in secret, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Why do you think that was? Why do you think it says for fear of the Jews, but why don't you think it was the disciples? Why was it these two guys who were secret? I mean, you can only guess here, but still.
This, I think, was preparation by God himself to have individuals that were able to do this. Joseph of Arimathea was, I think at one point it said, was very wealthy. He had a tomb hollowed out and everything ready to go, but it wasn't anybody had been laid there before, so it had to be a person that could afford this kind of stuff and had the kind of prestige to go before Pilate in the first place and ask for the body and it be granted to him.
Right.
Nicodemus, we know he was part of the Sanhedrin, so he would have been a very pretty influential person, and you would think a person that was wealthy enough to buy this mixture of myrrh and what was it other stuff? Myrrh and aloes. So this was pretty expensive items to have at his burial. So I think this was just part of divine providence that God had these men ready to do this at this particular point in time. I don't think the disciples had the money or the means whereabout to have the audience with Pilate to ask for the body, and they didn't have any place to put it with if they did.
Right.
So I mean, God always prepares in His kingdom, prepares people and situations to be taken care of.
Makes sense to me. And
One
one thing we find about this man, Joseph of Arimathea, is that he did not consent to Jesus' crucifixion, and which is very interesting because most people did, crucify him, they all said. You learn that fact, by the way, in Luke's account. In Luke chapter 23 is when you find that Joseph of Arimathea wasn't one of the ones that consented unto the death of Jesus. That's verse 50 and 51 of Luke 23. And he was a man who sat on the council. And so that's really impressive. And Luke goes so far as to call him a good and righteous man. So there's a little something about him. One thing about this whole event, though, with Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, is that in Matthew 27 account, it tells us all the way down in verse 57 that they came when it was evening. He says, when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself also had become a disciple of Jesus. And so these events that we have where Joseph is collecting the body of Jesus and wrapping him in the linen cloth, not only that, but of Nicodemus bringing these 75 to 100 pounds of spices to anoint Jesus with. All this takes place sometime after the crucifixion. It says in evening time in Matthew chapter 27. All right, let's see. Does anybody have anything else? I think that's just about it. There's maybe one more thing that we could note. It is a new tomb which no one had laid before, and so Jesus is getting sort of the royal treatment in this burial. And it was only used not as a permanent measure. This was only done as a temporary measure because it was nearing this day of rest, so they had to take Jesus' body and get it in the tomb as fast as possible. All right. Anybody have any questions or comments on John 19, 1 to 42?
Do you know if it's a fact that by Hebrew accounting that any portion of the day is counted as a whole?
That's what I've heard for a long, long time. And you know what? I can prove it to you. I've got here a couple of notes that we can go through right now. Just a second.
If it is, it makes the accounting much easier.
All right, let's see. There are two statements of fact. First, any part of the day would count for the whole day, and any part of the night would count for the whole night. Secondly, traditionally, the Hebrews would understand that the calendar day would begin at evening at sundown. Okay, hang on just a second. All right, go to 2 Chronicles 10, verse 5. 2 Chronicles 10 and verse 5. This in 2 Chronicles chapter 10 and verse 5, Rehoboam asked Jeroboam, let's see, they were asked to return after 3 days. Now, after 3 days for us, if we're talking on Sunday, after 3 days for us means Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they need to return on Thursday because that's after 3 days. But this is not how they reckon time. Look at verse 12.
Would it be anything different when it says return? Because mine's pretty different. It said return to me in 3 days.
Okay.
Not after 3 days, in 3 days.
All right. The reason why we use this specific language in this case, this is from the King James Version. Because in the King James Version, when it talks about Jesus' resurrection, he says, I'll be raised after 3 days. So this is what I'm going to point out here. 2 Chronicles 10 and verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king bade, saying, come again to me on the third day. Now they understood that they would need to return. Let's see. Right, okay. So they would need to return on... so after 3 days, let's see, Monday, Tuesday. All right. They would need to return on... They returned on Tuesday, because you had day 1, day 2, then day 3. They didn't return after 3 days like we think, where you go 1, 2, 3, and then they return on this day. And so they returned on the third day. Now, why not Wednesday? Again, they counted part of the day as the whole day. So they begin counting on Sunday and not on Monday as we would. So that's just one part of that. There's something else though. What with Jesus though, it doesn't just say after 3 days. It specifies 3 days and 3 nights. In Acts 27:27, the Bible says that when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. Now, why didn't Paul just say 14 days or 14 days and nights? Because there's a difference between the two. You can have 14 nights and only have 13 days. Okay? But you can also have 14 days without necessarily having 14 nights. But Paul was trying to point out specifically